Imagine the sheer, unadulterated terror coursing through the veins of young Rocco. He is just a boy, carrying the heavy, agonizing weight of a legacy family on his fragile shoulders, thrust into a nightmare that no child should ever have to witness. Deep in the secluded woods, far away from the safety and familiarity of Port Charles, the biting cold wind howling against the thin wooden walls of an isolated cabin, Rocco makes a discovery that freezes the blood in his veins. He finds Britt Westbourne, the woman who has been his fierce protector and companion on this harrowing run, lying completely unconscious on the unforgiving floorboards. Their, her skin is ashen, her breathing is shallow, and the vibrant, defiant spark that has always defined a formidable Brit is terrifyingly absent. In that suffocating moment of panic, Rocco is not a brave adventurer. He is a terrified child, watching the only adult he trusts slip away into the dark abyss. The sheer desperation in his trembling hands as he reaches for the phone is enough to shatter the hardest of hearts, ladies. With no one else to turn to, and the shadows of their pursuers looming ever closer, Rocco makes a frantic, breathless phone call to the one man who might have the resources to save them, Cassius Faison. Now, we all know the complicated, deeply twisted history of the Faison bloodline. It is a vicious cycle of betrayal, madness, and unexpected redemption. For Rocco to reach out to Cassius speaks volumes about the absolute desperation of their situation. When Cassius receives that call, hearing the sheer panic in the young boy's voice, he does not hesitate. He drops everything, navigating the treacherous roads to reach that hidden cabin. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, could have prepared Cassius for the devastating scene that awaits him when he finally throws open that heavy wooden door. The reality of the situation hits him with the force of a freight train, and the gravity of the crisis instantly shifts from a simple rescue mission to a literal fight against the ticking clock of mortality. Upon rushing to Britt's side, Cassius's experienced eyes quickly assess the grim reality of her condition. This is not just exhaustion, and it is certainly not a minor illness. The Huntington's disease, that cruel, unforgiving genetic curse that has stalked Britt like a relentless shadow, has finally spiraled completely out of control. Without access to her specialized medications, without the advanced treatments that have kept the symptoms at bay, her body is rapidly shutting down. Cassius realizes in a heart-stopping instant that all the sheer willpower in the world cannot save her now. Britt is out of time. If she stays in this cabin, she will die. It is a cold, brutal, undeniable fact. The only place on Earth that possesses the cutting-edge medical equipment, the specific pharmaceutical resources, and the expert neurological care required to pull her back from the brink of death is General Hospital back in Port Charles. But returning to Port Charles is a monumental risk, a gamble with the highest possible stakes. This brings Cassius to an agonizing, soul-crushing crossroads. He has to make a decision that will tear this fragile makeshift family apart. He must transport Britt back to the city immediately, racing against the fading beats of her heart. But what about Rocco? The instinct is to bring the boy home, to return him to the loving arms of Dante and Lulu. However, Cassius knows the dark, sinister underbelly of Port Charles better than anyone. He knows that bringing Rocco back into the city limits is essentially signing the boy's death warrant. The vicious cycle of violence that plagues their lives has created an impossible paradox. The only place that can save Britt is the exact place that will guarantee Rocco's demise. Cassius stands in that dimly lit cabin, looking from the unconscious woman he must save to the terrified boy he must protect, realizing that he has to split them up. It is a heartbreaking moment of profound sacrifice, the kind of emotional torture that these writers excel at delivering. Why is Port Charles such a lethal trap for young Rocco? Because of Ross Cullum. Cullum is not just some run-of-the-mill thug. He is a ruthless, calculated predator with a deeply entrenched, hidden agenda. Cullum is currently hunting Rocco with the relentless precision of a bloodhound, desperate to silence the boy forever regarding that horrific shooting incident from months ago. Rocco is the ultimate loose end, the one pure, innocent witness who can tear down Cullum's entire manipulative scheme. If Cullum even catches a whisper that Rocco has returned to the city, he will strike with lethal force. There will be no trial, no negotiations, and no mercy. Cullum's objective is complete and utter eradication. Cassius is acutely aware of this terrifying reality. He knows that the Port Charles Police Department, despite Dante's best efforts, is compromised and currently incapable of shielding a high-value target like Rocco from an assassin as deeply embedded as Cullum. So, what does a man like Cassius do when faced with an impossible, deadly equation? He reaches into his darkest, most closely guarded vault of secrets. He realizes that traditional law enforcement cannot save Rocco. The boy needs a ghost. He needs a phantom, a lethal protector who operates entirely outside the boundaries of the law, someone who strikes fear into the hearts of men like Cullum. Cassius kneels down to eye level with the trembling Rocco, placing a firm, reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. He looks deep into Rocco's tear-filled eyes and prepares to utter a name that has not been spoken aloud in Port Charles without a heavy shroud of grief in a very long time. It is a moment of pure, unadulterated cinematic tension. Cassius is about to pull back the curtain on the greatest deception of the decade, a secret so massive it threatens to upend the entire power structure of the soap opera universe. Cassius reveals a bombshell that literally made me gasp out loud when I first pieced this theory together. He tells Rocco a story about a clandestine operation that took place months ago in the darkest, most heavily fortified black sites of the WSB. We all thought Jason Morgan was lost to us, swept away by the cruel tides of fate. But the truth, the horrifying, mind-bending truth, is that Jason was secretly captured and held prisoner by the WSB. Why? Because Jason possessed highly sensitive, incredibly dangerous information regarding the infamous Cold Fusion project, initiated by none other than Cesar Faison. The WSB, in their infinite corruption and insatiable thirst for global dominance, wanted that technology, and they were willing to torture, interrogate, and hold Jason indefinitely to get it. They erased his existence, burying him in a bureaucratic black hole, leaving his family to mourn an empty grave. But the WSB severely underestimated the intricate web of loyalties that bind the denizens of Port Charles. Cassius, utilizing his own dark connections and navigating a treacherous landscape of espionage, discovered Jason's horrific captivity. In a move of sheer, unadulterated brilliance, Cassius orchestrated a daring, highly classified extraction. He formed an unholy alliance with shadows and ghosts to break Jason Morgan out of that impenetrable fortress. Cassius was the one who facilitated Jason's escape, providing him with a new identity, untraceable resources, and a heavily fortified safe house completely off the grid. Far beyond the grasping reach of the WSB, Anna Devane, Jack Brennan, and even Carly herself. Jason has been biding his time, healing from his captivity, and silently preparing for the day he would have to reemerge. And now that day has violently arrived. Cassius pulls a crumpled, weather-beaten piece of paper from his coat pocket. On it is an address, a set of coordinates that leads to a place that does not exist on any official map. He presses this lifeline into Rocco's small, shaking hand. If you want to survive, Cassius tells the boy, his voice thick with a mixture of dread and absolute certainty. If you want to live long enough to see your mother and father again, you must find Jason Morgan. He is the only man on this earth who can protect you from Ross Cullum. It is a chilling, profound passing of the torch. Cassius is entrusting the life of a legacy child to the ultimate enforcer. Rocco, clutching that piece of paper like a sacred talisman, understands the gravity of his mission. He must leave the unconscious Britt behind, stepping out of the cabin and into the freezing, unforgiving wilderness alone, armed with nothing but a secret address and the desperate hope of finding a ghost. Let us take a moment to truly appreciate the sheer psychological magnitude of Rocco's solitary journey. This is a young boy, stripped of his family, his home, and his protectors, navigating a dangerous world with a target on his back. Every rustling branch, every distant headlight is a potential threat. He is forced to grow up in the span of a single, terrifying night. The writers are brilliantly weaving a coming-of-age narrative wrapped in a high-stakes thriller. As Rocco follows the cryptic directions, moving deeper into the shadows, he is not just walking toward a safe house, he is walking toward his destiny. He is carrying the weight of the Falconary and Spencer legacies, proving that the resilience of his bloodline cannot be extinguished by the likes of Ross Cullum. The emotional resonance of this trek is staggering, ladies. It is the kind of storytelling that grips your soul and refuses to let go. And then we arrive at the moment that will undoubtedly break the internet. Rocco finally reaches the secluded, heavily fortified compound. He gathers every ounce of courage he possesses and knocks on that heavy steel door. When the door slowly swings open, the figure standing in the shadows is none other than the legendary enforcer himself, Jason Morgan. Jason, who has spent months desperately trying to avoid the wars of Port Charles, who has fought so hard to remain a ghost, looks down at the exhausted, terrified face of Dante's son. In that single, breathtaking instant, Jason realizes that he cannot run anymore. The war he tried to escape has literally arrived at his doorstep. The protective, fierce instinct that has always defined Jason Morgan instantly reignites. He pulls the boy inside, locking the door against the darkness, and the silent guardian of Port Charles is officially back in the game. Meanwhile, on the completely opposite end of the spectrum, a different kind of chaotic storm is brewing. Cassius's vehicle screeches to a violent halt in the emergency bay of General Hospital. He bursts through the double doors, carrying the lifeless, fragile body of Britt Westbourne. The sterile, brightly lit corridors of the hospital are suddenly shattered by the frantic shouts for trauma teams and crash carts. The nurses and doctors, who have known and loved Britt for years, are frozen in sheer disbelief before their medical training kicks into overdrive. The prodigal daughter, the brilliant doctor who vanished into the night, has been unceremoniously dumped back onto their doorstep, hovering precariously on the razor-thin edge between life and death. The sheer panic that erupts in the ER is palpable, a visceral reminder of just how beloved and controversial Britt remains in this town. The news of Britt's sudden, dramatic return spreads through Port Charles like a devastating wildfire. Lulu, Dante, and Carly are summoned to the hospital, their hearts pounding with a sickening mixture of hope and absolute dread. When they arrive and see Britt hooked up to a terrifying array of life support machines, fighting a desperate, losing battle against the ravages of Huntington's, the emotional collapse is instantaneous. Lulu is weeping, Dante is demanding answers, and Carly is pacing the floor like a caged tiger, her mind racing 1,000,000 miles a minute. Where has Britt been? How did she get into this catastrophic state? And most importantly, where in God's name is Rocco? The tension in that waiting room is thick enough to cut with a knife as the legacy families brace themselves for the inevitable fallout. But Cassius is not finished dropping atomic bombs on these unsuspecting families. Standing in the center of that emotionally charged waiting room, surrounded by the furious, desperate faces of Port Charles's elite, Cassius raises his hands to silence the chaos. He looks directly at Carly, knowing that the words he is about to speak will fundamentally shatter her reality. He reveals that Rocco is safe, but he is not coming home. And then he drops the ultimate revelation. Jason Morgan is alive. He is free. And he is currently holding the very evidence that can completely obliterate Ross Cullum's entire criminal empire. The absolute deafening silence that follows this declaration is heavier than a physical blow. You could hear a pin drop in that hospital corridor as the sheer magnitude of Cassius's words slowly sinks into their collective consciousness. If you ask me, we need to talk about Carly's psychological reaction to this news, because it is going to be a masterclass in emotional devastation. Imagine being Carly. You have mourned this man. You have wept over his memory, tried to move on with your life, and made impossible choices based on the agonizing belief that he was gone forever. To suddenly discover that Jason has been alive this entire time, that he was held captive, and that Cassius Faison of all people knew and kept it a secret, Carly is going to experience a catastrophic emotional meltdown. The betrayal she will feel, intertwined with the overwhelming, suffocating relief that her soulmate is still breathing, will push her to the absolute brink of her sanity. She will want to tear Cassius apart with her bare hands, yet she will be entirely dependent on him to find out where Jason is hiding. It is a brilliant, agonizing paradox for her character. This incredible narrative brilliantly splits the storyline into two distinct, high-octane battlefronts. On one side, bathed in the glaring, unforgiving, fluorescent lights of General Hospital, we have Britt Westbourne fighting the most brutal medical war of her life. It is a battle of science, willpower, and the desperate prayers of her friends. On the other side, shrouded in the impenetrable darkness of the criminal underworld, we have Jason and Rocco. They are a lethal, unexpected duo, quietly, meticulously preparing for a massive, devastating counterattack against the forces of Ross Cullum and Jen Sidwell. Jason is no longer just surviving, he is weaponizing his ghost status. He is gathering the intelligence, loading the weapons, and teaching Rocco the harsh, unforgiving realities of survival. It is a breathtaking juxtaposition of light and dark, healing and vengeance. Now, let us dive into the domino effect of this massive revelation. If Jason Morgan is preparing to strike back from the shadows, how does this impact the rest of the board? Think about it, ladies. Ross Cullum is already cornering Carly at Windermere. He is already obtaining search warrants and tightening his grip on the city. When Cullum realizes that Jason Morgan is not only alive but actively hunting him with a witness, Cullum is going to panic. And a panicked predator is the most dangerous kind. What if Cullum decides to use the ultimate leverage? What if he targets Jocelyn, who is already missing, or uses Carly as bait to flush Jason out of hiding? The manipulative scheme will escalate to a fever pitch. Jason's resurrection is the catalyst that will force every single hidden agenda into the light, causing a chain reaction of violence, exposure, and ultimate ruin for the villains who thought they had won. The board is set, the pieces are moving, and the storm of the century is about to break over Port Charles. We have a dying woman fighting for her last breath, a legacy child thrust into a world of assassins, and a legendary enforcer rising from the grave to rain down absolute hellfire on his enemies. The legacy families are about to be tested in ways they never imagined, and the vicious cycle of trauma and triumph is spinning faster than ever before. But my beautiful friends, I have to leave you with one chilling, lingering thought that has been keeping me awake at night. If Jason Morgan unleashes his full, unbridled wrath to protect Rocco and destroy Cullum, what dark, terrifying piece of his own soul will he have to sacrifice in the process? And will Carly even recognize the man who finally comes home?